presentation.
Actually let Mad Dog if formally introduced Bob Young to us.
Oh, no pressure.
Yeah, well, I think that Bob did a pretty good job of doing that. But Bob, if I remember correctly, you had actually been a digital distributor, right?
That's
you
exactly right. In my previous life, I was in the equipment rental and leasing business.
Wow.
And digital was our biggest single supplier of computer terminal equipment and mini computers. This is in the late 70s through the 1980s. The second of the companies I built in that field got into financial difficulty in 1992. I found myself unemployed, and that I'll tell the story if you like, but that's how I ended up in the open source free software world. Stumbled across Linux, and but for my business going out of business, I would not have had the success I did have with Red Hat.
Well, and then you went and started ACC Corp, the little catalog of selling CDs and stuff like that. And you also hooked up with Phil Hughes of the Linux Journal, and you decided to put out the Linux Journal. And my understanding was you lasted exactly one issue of the Linux kernel.
2 issues of
Two
Linux
issues.
Journal. And in fact, I think we got more than that. I think we were at 3 or 4 issues.
Wow.
But it was, so the story was, here's the sequence. I'm unemployed, working out of my wife's sewing closet. I stumbled
Before needlepoint.
No, this is long before needlepoint.
Okay.
This is 1993. And I had been publishing a little newsletter called New York Unix to all the Unix user groups up and down the East Coast, because in the leasing business, I was competing with much bigger companies, Comdisco and Lisametric. So to try and find deals before my bigger competitors did, I ran this newsletter, and I was trying to find the technical people within Citibank and the other large users of Unix, find their needs before their needs went to their purchasing department. And I would win the business and get a big promotion and do well, instead of which I found myself unemployed. So I decide maybe my New York Unix newsletter is a good business in and of itself when I was unemployed in my wife's sewing closet. So I was doing that full time. Someone says, hey, you should do the Linux Journal. Phil Hughes was looking for someone to help him with it. So he and I teamed up. He was the original editor. I was the original publisher. We did that together for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months. But meanwhile, I was starving to death. I had 3 kids and a mortgage. And I had to figure out how to pay this mortgage. And I wasn't doing it in the publishing business. So I realized I should switch my business from publishing to product distribution. In other words, instead of selling advertising to others, I should use my own customer list for the magazines and sell them computer parts and O'Reilly books, and of course, copies of Linux, from Slackware to Yggdrasil to Pacific High Tech. And it was when I was in the product distribution business, after I had handed the Linux Journal back to Phil Hughes and he took over publishing it, that I needed products for my new ACC bookstore. A couple of my customers tell me about this Red Hat thing that this kid in North Carolina was doing. I call up Mark Ewing. I say, hey, Mark, I'm looking for products. Some of my customers tell me yours is a really good Linux. How about I buy, I don't know, I was selling 1,000 copies of Linux a month at that time. So, I should be able to switch sell 10% of them. If yours is a better Linux, I should switch sell 10%. So, send me 90 days worth, send me 300 copies. Dead silence at the end of the phone. Turns out Mark was only thinking of manufacturing 300 copies. So he's going, holy cow, I've hit it big. This guy wants 300 copies. Meanwhile, I knew how little I was paying Mark for these 300 copies. And I knew this kid was starving to death. And so over the course of a couple of months, we realized we had a lot in common. We saw the world the same way. So we put our two little businesses together, and that became Red Hat.
So I will tell you how I first got involved with Linux. At that time, there was a magazine called Dr. Dobbs' Journal of Computer Calisthenics and Orthodontia, or Running Light without Overbite, and bite was spelled B-Y-T-E.
Yeah.
And I would read that every month. And all of a sudden, it was November of 1993. In the back of it, there was this advertisement for complete Unix system with all the source code for $99. And I'm looking at this, I'm going, that's crazy talk, because the license for Unix is $160,000 for the source code, and that's the only way it was distributed. And I knew that Berkeley was still going through its suit with AT&T and hadn't been solved yet. So how could they possibly do this? But hey, what the heck? I set away my $99 and I get this CD and a very thin little book. And I try and run it, but I can't run it because I'm at DEC and I don't have any PCs. I have VAX workstations, I have MIPS workstations, I have Alpha workstations. So I can't run this thing. All I can do is look at the man pages. So I looked at the man pages, looks pretty good, put it in my filing cabinet, went away. Many months later, when I met Linus at DECUS in New Orleans, and I met people from Red Hat and stuff like that, I pulled that back out, and lo and behold, it was a copy of Yggdrasil. Because in 1993, the Linux kernel was at 0.99999, and companies like Red Hat and Yggdrasil and Slackware and Soft Landing Systems and a couple others were bringing out distributions.
So tell the story, though. You did not meet Linus at DECUS. You invited Linus to DECUS, correct? Uh-oh. Oh, dear. This is not good.
I don't think it's your fault, Bob.
I'm trying to find somewhere that maybe I have better internet, slightly better.
Mad Dog's camera likes to freeze, and I think, your internet might just be a little jittery. But did you have anything prepared for for your business, building open businesses?
So no, I was going to talk though about the story. So yes,
okay.
I can speak to that for a few minutes, and then when we go to questions, if we don't have any, Mad Dog and I can get back into some of these stories.
Do you prefer me to be on camera, or would you like to have me be off camera? How would you work this? I defer to you.
It's fine by me. I'll be happy to talk for about 20 minutes about how to think about open source businesses or open businesses generally, as in businesses where you do not hoard your technology, you share your technology or your invention. So I'd be happy to speak to that.
Okay, I will jump off. I actually did a talk about open communities, which is less on the business side. So I am waiting with bated breath. So we will all be listening to you.
Okay, good enough.
All right.
I do have some questions to prompt you along on that.
That would be great.
I read an article by SJVN interviewing you, and you even said during this broadcast, I'm not that smart, so I decided, I don't know, I'll start a company. That's quite a bit of the leap of faith. So I myself had experienced layoffs and unemployment as many other folks in the tech industry. And it is a conversion to working for a large companies like Mad Dog was, but working for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about the working for yourself and believing in yourself to put it all out on the line? Like
Sure.
that?
And I'll explain again, coming back to this open concept. It actually reduces risk. So let me tell that story because it's a good one. And so going all the way back, okay, so now I come out of college as a really bad student. The one thing I knew for a fact, through 16 years from elementary school to being a really bad college student, the one thing I knew is I was the dumbest guy in the room. Because my teachers each and every year told me that through the quality of my grades. To the point where at one particular school, they used to put the grades up. This is back before self-esteem worries and this sort of thing. They used to put the grades up on the classroom door. And I, of course, with the last name like Young, thought they put them up there alphabetically because that explained why my name was always at the bottom of the list. Okay. So you graduate college knowing one thing, that you're the dumbest guy in the room, but yet you grew up in a family of 3 boys. All your cousins were boys. You're a pretty competitive human being. So how can you be successful if you're ambitious and you're the dumbest guy in the room? And the answer is, well, there's actually multiple answers. But one of the answers is, in my case, don't apply for a job. Because if I got a job, pick a corporation, I would never get a promotion because I'm the dumbest guy in the room. So in my case, starting a business was in fact the low risk thing to do, because all I had to do was look after my customers. If I could make my customers successful, they didn't care, about whether I was smart or dumb. They didn't care about all the politics in corporations, or whether my resume was good or bad. They only cared whether I actually solved their problem for them. So that was one trick. The other trick, if you're the dumbest guy in the room, make friends with the smart guys, which of course is why I'm friends with guys like Mad Dog Hall, is because John is, for all his lovable Santa Claus demeanor, is in fact a very smart guy. And it has the respect of other smart people, and I needed to recruit smart people. So yes, starting a business is a very high risk activity. Don't kid yourself. Was I nervous about starting my own business? Yes. But like anything else, the more, if you practice things, you get better at them. So if you start a business and you fail, start the next business. Because when you start a business and you fail, you didn't learn. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that they learned that they're not good enough at running a business. But that's not what they learned. They learned a huge amount about running a business. They learned a huge amount about what not to do in running a business. And if they embrace what they have learned, the next time they learn a business, start a business, that they're substantially better positioned. And if the second business crashes and burns, start a third business, because now you're 3 times as smart as you were the first time. Okay, but here's why open is important. And it's one that, I often speak, people, because of the success of Red Hat, they think I'm a smart guy and I'm not. So they ask me for the secrets of success. And my key secret, there's 2 secrets basically. One is, and the most important one, in fact, is keep your friends close and your loved ones closer. So if you're lucky enough to find the love of your life, which I was, they are your priority. Your business, I don't care how important it is. I don't care how well it goes. It's a distant second to your personal relationships. Okay, that's one. Number two, choose your parents very wisely. And sounds like a joke, and it is a joke. But it's not 100% a joke, because when I say choose your parents, understand what your parents taught you, appreciate what you learned from your parents. In my case, I was a very fortunate, I chose my parents very wisely, let me put it that way. And my father was a businessman and had done some entrepreneurial things in his career. But he was also just a very broad-minded person. He was one of these people who sort of loved the world. He was fascinated by immigration. He was not an immigrant himself, but he could see how all the immigrants we were living in Canada were making our country better. And so he is just a big fan of immigration, not on principle, but simply because he knew so many of these people who were so motivated that if you're an immigrant, you're a risk taker. If you're not a risk taker, why would you get on a ship or an airplane to go to some strange country? And risk takers are very productive people in our society. But the point that he really enjoyed was the free market system, was democracy. He was just a huge fan of the way our free market democracies maximize our freedom at an individual level, maximize our happiness. He along with me, are great fans of the American Constitution, in particular the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. Was it? Anyways, the line about the pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, of all the important things in life, pursuing happiness gets written into your governing charter as a country. It's what I admire most about the US. But now if you take that concept and you sort of say, you are a businessman, what's your purpose? What's your responsibility? And your responsibility is to make your customers' world a better place. Admittedly, perhaps in a small way, but nonetheless, if you make their lives a better place, better than your competitors do, the world will reward you for making the world a better place. And that's what our free market democracy allows us as business to do, as businesses, is our customers are voting with their checkbook every day on which supplier is making the world a better place fastest. And if you build a business that makes some set of customers' world a better place better than the competitors do, you'll have a big opportunity. So I do a couple of businesses in the computer leasing business from whatever, when did I graduate college? 76 through 82. And in 92, the story that we were telling with Mad Dog just there. And in 92, I stumble into this open source thing. And I've been on the computer, on the hardware side of the computing industry. In hardware back in the 70s and 80s, there was just a truism that hardware evolves forward faster than software does. And when I would ask people why that is true, I mean, software guys write software in their pajamas, sort of on their computer screen. Hardware guys have to design a computer and then they have to build an effing factory to manufacture the thing. So why does hardware move forward faster than software? All of us in the hardware business couldn't understand it. It was just a mystery. Fast forward 1992, I stumble into open source software. When I first see it, I'm the world's biggest skeptic of free software. Because I'd ask guys, where is this stuff from? They'd say, well, it's from engineers according to their skill, to engineers according to their need. I don't know if you've studied any Karl Marx, but that should sound familiar. And I'm going, no, I'm a business guy. I'm a cold-hearted capitalist, and things do not scale. They do not replicate if there isn't an economic engine driving them. Altruism is great. I love altruism. I hope that people think I'm an altruistic guy, but that's on my personal side. On my business side, I understand there has to be a business model. The money has to flow to allow these products to get produced, to be supported, and to evolve forward. So I'm looking at this open source stuff. No one can explain to me who's paying for it. And they're all saying, oh, it's going to be big. And I'm going, no, it's not. Microsoft is going to come out with a decent operating system one of these days. Or, Sun Solaris will get their act together. Or maybe IBM will solve the operating system space. But what happened was between 91, 92, and 93, instead of going away, this free software Linux stuff kept getting better. And I couldn't figure out why. So I got in my car and I went and visited the user groups that I was telling you about previously. And I would ask them, where's this from? I went up to Boston. I sat down with Richard Stallman. But the defining story was I went down to Washington, met Mad Dog's friend, Don Becker, the guy behind the Beowulf project. Don's giving a presentation at the DC Linux users group. I'm showing real interest in it. He says, Bob, if you're really that interested, you should come out to Goddard Space Flight Laboratory and see what we're doing. So we hop in his car at the end of this thing at 10 o'clock at night. And this was, Mad Dog probably can give you a date better than I can, but it was probably early 1994. And he had just unplugged, Goddard had just unplugged a $5 million Cray mini supercomputer and plugged in Don Becker's Beowulf Linux machine instead and got better performance out of it, out of $100,000 of off-the-shelf Intel equipment. And when I went up to Don's lab to see this thing, it was literally 4 the computers, boxes, the old tower boxes across, by 4 up, wrapped with duct tape, with Ethernet drivers, like Ethernet cards in each of them, all connected together at the back with the spaghetti of wires. So I stopped and I go, Don, why are you giving away all the Ethernet software that you're writing to make this work? Why are you giving it away for free? Like, who's letting you do this? Because I presume you're earning a real salary at Goddard to do this. So if you're writing valuable software and it's costing Goddard money, why would they give it away for free? Don looks at me and goes, well, that's a really good question. I don't know. You should, next time you should ask my boss, Dr. Thomas Sterling. And I go, okay, well, thanks, Don. Next time I'm in Washington, you'll have to introduce me. Don goes, oh no, don't kid yourself. Dr. Sterling works stupider hours than I do. He's probably still here. So I meet Thomas Sterling in the cafeteria of the basement of Goddard Space Flight Laboratory. And I'm asking him this question. And he goes, okay, hold on, Bob. Let me get this straight. Yes, you're taking Don's Ethernet drivers. You're building it into the Red Hat Linux thing that you and your buddy Mark are doing. And you're not paying me any money for it. So you're getting it for free from me, right? I go, yeah, that's right. And why are you letting me do this? He says, so all I get in return, because let's agree that Don's Ethernet drivers are worth tens of thousands of dollars, maybe $25,000 that you should be paying me. But when I give them to you for free, all I get in return, just all you're giving me back is a gigabyte worth of a high performance operating system with complete source code and a license that allows me to do whatever I want with it. I think Mad Dog had a number of $160,000 for source code for Unix. So that's when I understood. That was when I got really excited about this free software, open source Red Hat thing. And when I went home the next day and caught up with Nancy, who was pretty worried about our kids' college education at that point, it's going, Nancy, I think we might actually be able to pay our kids' college education. And the reason for it is what Dr. Thomas Sterling had explained was a barter system. And I understand barter system. That's an economic model. So Goddard gave something away for free in order to get something back of higher value. It wasn't a formal barter system, but it was a barter system. Once I understood it was a barter system, you could see how this thing could get really big, because this informal economy, coming all the way back to the point of how to think about your business, and should you be proprietary, and should you hoard your knowledge and your IP, or should you share your knowledge or an IP? Well, you do have to have a business model, don't get me wrong. But when you share your IP, your customers become your fans. You don't, your customers aren't over there. They're inside the tent with you. You're part of their team, they're part of your team. And so talking about teams, I've done this everywhere I've gone as well as I can, but Hamilton Tiger Cats, a football team. If we have a stadium that fits 25,000 people, but we have another 500,000 Canadians who think of themselves as Tiger Cat fans. And the more we can rope them into that this is their team, this isn't my team, this isn't some shareholders team. The Tiger Cats belong to the community of Hamilton. And the more we can message about that, and the more we can get their feedback into how we should perform better, and just treat them as our friends, we get better advice and better feedback than if we sort of kept them at arm's length. And it's more fun on top of that. Our players enjoy playing for our fans because our fans are more engaged. Our fans are more supportive of our players because the players engage with them. Lulu.com. And by the way, I should point out Pat, because given the vast amount of money that OLF is paying me to chat to you guys tonight, my only recompense as a sales guy is impressions. So the longer I talk, the more Lulu impressions you get. Sorry, that's my little joke. It's also the commercial interlude. We'll get back to the story. At Lulu, the idea wasn't, oh, we're going to build a printing service. The idea was there's a whole bunch of authors who can't get their books published. And, John Grisham and J.K. Rowling's make a gazillion dollars, but anyone who's written a book with a narrow audience, less than 10,000 copies a year, will not get published. And they don't get published because the publisher can't figure out how to make money on anything less than 10,000 copies a year. But meanwhile, the 1,000 people who might have read your book and might have gained value from your book are not going to be served because your book will never get published. And that was the problem we were trying to solve. So our problem wasn't, we weren't thinking about this from the point of view of how do we get rich? We were thinking of Lulu from the early days of how do we make our authors successful? And again, it's this thing that, going all the way back to the story I was telling you about my father, this joy of working in a free market democratic system where we as business guys are making the world a better place, one customer at a time, is just such a pleasure and such a joy. And it takes so much of the stress away from launching your business because it's no longer about you. It's about your customers. It's about the world. And if you can build a product or a service that is just a little bit better than your competitors, you will be successful. If you get lucky and you stumble into a product or a service that's a great deal better than your competitors, then you might build a Red Hat. And the cute story about open source and Red Hat was, or still is, that none of our bigger competitors, so when we were early, so 94, 95, we start making some money, 96, 97, so we're starting to grow, and we're going, who's going to jump into our market and take it from us? And we go, well, clearly Microsoft should, and all of our source code is free. Microsoft literally could download Red Hat Linux and sell it as Microsoft Linux. That was the terms of our license. They'd have to recompile it, but they can have all our things for free. So it comes back to a question, Bethlyn, that you sort of asked early on. Why the GPL? And what I loved about the GPL was it solved that worry for me, which is if Microsoft jumped into the Linux business and took all of Red Hat's code and wrote better code, because after all, they're Microsoft and they must be able to write better code. If they did that, how was I going to compete? And the nice thing about the GPL is they couldn't do it without giving me, i.e. Red Hat, their innovations. And so suddenly Microsoft is part of the community because of the GPL and the viral nature of the GPL. So Red Hat became strong, evangelists, that's the word I was looking for, evangelists of the GPL, because it protected us from any much bigger competitor coming in and unfairly competing with us on it. Plus, of course, it made us part of the community. Other engineers working on other tools were happy to share their tools with us because we shared everything we were writing with them under the GPL. The funny little story was, I told you about meeting Richard Stallman. I meet Richard Stallman several years later at a conference, and Red Hat's now doing really, really well. So Red Hat's now the leading Linux distribution. Everyone's a little worried about Red Hat. They're going, Red Hat has too much market share. Red Hat are the Microsoft of the Linux space. And of course, I'd say, no, we aren't the Microsoft of the Linux space. We give every line of code we write away for free. We can't be the Microsoft of the Linux space. We might be the market leaders. As the market leaders, maybe we're going to do bad things. But whatever bad things we do isn't going to be Microsoft's bad things because we can't. We don't have Microsoft's rules working for us. So anyway, I meet Richard Stallman. Richard treats me like that. He goes, Bob, your Red Hat thing really isn't very good for free software Linux. And, I'm worried that you're going to take all of us down a really bad path one of these days. And I go, Richard, I am more committed to free software than you are. Of which, of course, takes him aback, because that's not possible. This guy's an evil capitalist businessman. He says so himself. And I go, the reason I'm more committed than you are is you believe in free software. You believe it as an ideology. But the problem is you could wake up tomorrow morning and you could have a eureka moment and go, oh, I've been wrong. And you could simply change your mind and not do free software open source anymore and go to work at Microsoft. Whereas my business model, my customers are completely dependent on my commitment to open source and free software. I can't wake up tomorrow. I'm stuck. Unlike you can go to the Bahamas and sell proprietary software. I'm stuck selling free software till the end of time. And one of the great pleasures is, of course, Red Hat now, as part of IBM, is still giving away all the code they write. So that's kind of the whole theme of my talk is don't be insular in your business planning. Be clever in your business planning, And if, like me, you're not a clever person, go and find clever people and make friends, because clever people like being asked for their advice, and they'll tell you how to do it if you're not smart enough. And I'm not smart enough, which is why John Hall is a friend of mine. But the real trick is as much as you can, be open with your customers. Treat your customers as part of the journey, because they are part of the journey. They are why you get out of bed in the morning. And if they're not why you get out of bed in the morning, you're in the wrong business, or you shouldn't be in business at all, I suppose. Okay, Beth Lynn, that's about it for my formal presentation. Do you have any more questions for me?
Warner has some questions from the audience. Warner?
Sure, I'll join. Why not? Well, thanks so much, Bob. Really appreciated your thoughts and your perspective. Super valuable.
Wow. My whole chat is very happy. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to speak over you.
Not at all. No worries, Nexie. In fact, I think you've been preparing all the questions now, so we'll take some time, reasonably as much time Bob and Mad Dog have with us, and wrap up with questions here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Bob, one of the things that you said that really spoke to me was, when you share your IP, your customers become your fans. That really resonated with me. I thank you very much for saying that.
Oh, John can speak to that. That was probably the single most motivating thing in the early days at Red Hat. We had no money. We were running up credit card charges just to keep our bills paid.
Yeah, exactly.
It should have been a very stressful time, except there were so many people who genuinely wanted us to succeed in a way that I'd never experienced before, that it was truly a pleasure.
So I have to tell one story, and this was at a Unix Expo in New York City at the Javits Auditorium, and Red Hat decided that they were going to come up there and have a little 10 by 10 booth, which was just some bookshelves, some folding bookshelves were put together in a red and white checkered tablecloth, and they were putting boxes of their software on there to sell, because if they didn't sell that software at the show, they didn't have enough money to get back to North Carolina. And Bob, I was at Digital. We had a big booth. I came over to say hello, and I said, let's go out to dinner. Bob says, well, I have some business things to do. He peels off two $20 bills and gives one to Donnie Barnes and one to Eric Drowan and says, make this last. And I knew that wasn't even enough money to get us downtown in a taxi cab. So Digital Equipment Corporation, on my expense account, took us all out to dinner. We had a great time, and that was a great evening, a really nice evening. But Bob's right. I wanted to see Red Hat succeed.
Thank you, Mad Dog. And now you understand why we all loved you. Is you had a digital equipment company expense account.
The jig is up. However many years later, now you know.
Well, and it goes back the other way. When we did the Alpha Linux port, it was Red Hat that took all of the distribution and put it together and put it on CDs to sell to our customers who bought Alpha systems. Okay. So, and I paid Red Hat to generate 4,000 CDs that had Red Hat and Digital's logo on it, but was Intel. And I gave those away to people and said, if you like these on your Intel machine, you'll love the Red Hat Alpha distribution for an Alpha.
So Mad Dog, I have a story for you that I bet you don't even know, which is that when we did the Alpha distribution, there was a lot of work. We had done, obviously, the Intel version. We did a Sun Microsystems Spark version. And there was a lot of pushback among the engineering team who shall remain nameless. These are friends of yours, so just while you pull the knives out of your back, Mad Dog, that's why I won't tell you who these guys were, who were saying, Bob, we're not going to sell any of these alpha versions. DEC's going to sell these alphas for $1 gazillion. Each machine is going to need one copy of Red Hat Linux. It's free software. So even if they buy 2 machines, they only have to buy one $50 sort of CD of Alpha Linux. Why are we should not be doing this. We should be putting that engineering effort into making our Intel version better. And I pulled rank. I did not pull rank very often. To this very day, I try and avoid ever pulling rank in any of the businesses I'm involved in. In other words, if I can't convince my colleagues to do something, we don't do it because they're smarter than I am. But every now and again, there's something on which I feel very strongly, and I have a real vision, and I will say, notwithstanding, you guys are probably right, we're still going to do this. And that was one of those times. And the reason for it, John, and this played very well for us in the end, is by having a Intel distribution and a Solaris or a Sun Spark version and an Alpha version. It made us look like the market leaders in the Linux world, even when we weren't the market leaders in the Linux world, because no one else had a Sun or Alpha version. It played very well in the end, but I didn't know if you actually knew that.
Yeah,
the Alpha version was what was my thank you for your support and a very strategic play.
So I should warn you, we're enjoying your stories a lot. So, but we will. We've been allowing the clock to run some, which we're perfectly okay with. But I just want to acknowledge that to be respectful of your time as well. We're probably targeting ending in the next 20 minutes or so. I did notice one question from the audience here in Zoom, and this is from Chris Punches. And he's asking Bob if you have any thoughts on how up-and-coming Linux distributions can get a company built around them or funded.
Oh dear.
That's a 20-minute question.
Exactly, it's 20 minutes. The good news, the oh dear was, I don't actually have an answer to that. And the reason for it is I've been out of Linux and open source. So one of the reasons why I'm the world's worst student is, as near as I can tell, back in the 1960s, I had what is today known as ADD. That's how I know it. So my ability to focus on any one thing for more than 5 minutes at a time is somewhat limited.
We call it squirreliness.
There you go. I've had a couple of colleagues who refer to my behavior as dogs chasing
Lovingly.
squirrels. So, and the story is the reason I got into Lulu and self-publishing, and the reason I then got into the sports, and now I'm actually getting into blockchain technologies, is because I get bored. And I did the whole open source Linux thing, and now there's so many smarter people than me working in that field that I haven't been keeping up. So I apologize. I don't have a good answer there.
Could I give a try on that?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
My feeling is that these days, if you're starting up a new distribution and you're expecting to make a business out of that, you're into very, very tough competition from a whole bunch of other Linux distributions. And what Bob is talking about of having your customers appreciate what you're doing for them is very important. But I've been saying to people lately, people don't buy computers. They don't buy software. What they're buying is a solution to a problem they have. And so if you go up a level and say that you're not starting a Linux distribution company, but instead you're using Linux to solve a problem or create another product, which is up higher, then that is the thing which they would be buying, right? And so now you're not competing on a Linux distribution basis, you're competing on a solution basis.
No,
John, I cannot support that answer more. That's 100% true for everyone in business at all times, whether you're working at General Motors or whether you're running your own business. What you're selling, the details of what you're selling, your customer could care less about. What your customer wants is something that makes their life better. And if you can articulate how your product, not the details of your product, but the benefit of your product makes the world a better place, you'll be a hero at General Motors and your business will do well.
And the thing is, if you're talking about open source versus closed source, Bob and I were talking about this the other day. The issue there is not freedom necessarily, but control. Your business, you need to have control of getting fixes done. You need to have control of extending the software. You need to have control of being able to put together the solution for your customer. And that's where free software really shines, okay? And if you think about it, IBM 25 years ago was selling hardware, mainframes, and software, MVS, and stuff like that. They sold off their laptop and their small server division to Lenovo, and they bought PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is a solutions business, because they realized that the profit margin on solutions is 19%, 20%, versus the profit margin on laptops and small servers is only 2 to 3%. And they couldn't survive on 2 to 3%. And so now when you walk through a airport and you see an advertisement from IBM, all it says is IBM Business Solutions. That's what they sell.
Great thoughts, really great thoughts. I like to call it technology with a market problem. In entrepreneurship, typically you're solving a market problem that's a viable business. Nixie, I know you had at least maybe a question or two that you might want to highlight from our friends on the internet at large.
Okay, so this one is for Tiger Cat. I'm going to call you that now. I was like, this is just our little secret, and those on YouTube and the Zoom chat now. You're Tiger Cat forever. Are you familiar with the right to repair movement? So the right to repair any of your technology,
Yes.
modify it, and
Yes.
how do you feel? What are both of your feelings? I'm cool with just applying the question to both.
Okay, so I'll pass it to John after this. If someone is working in that field and they want some help, again, bob@lulu.com, because it's the right thing for us to do. You're beginning to see some of our politicians actually understand the problem. But yeah, it's a big part of why open source was such an important movement. Talking about IBM, so John was using a good example of IBM's being the good guy. IBM is actually the bad guy that helped Red Hat be wildly successful, don't get me wrong. So 1964, Thomas Watson Jr., so he had taken over the CEO job at IBM from his dad, who was Thomas Watson Sr., obviously. And Jr. realized that IBM had a monopoly on computers, business computers at the time. Their 360 was a huge success, and they were putting all the dwarfs. This is more than you want to know, but dwarfs were, I'll let Mad Dog, but there was Amdahl and Honeywell and a bunch of other guys. Anyway, so they owned the space, and Watson Jr. realized, prior to that, software had been given away for free in order to sell computers, to sell hardware. Watson realized that if he only gave away the binaries and retained the source code and gave away the binaries on a license that required the customer to pay IBM money for any changes to those binaries, IBM would have a whole new revenue stream. And that's how it played out. But Watson, it invented the proprietary software business out of whole cloth. And as we used to explain when we were doing our roadshow, and the investors who were going to invest in the Red Hat IPO couldn't understand what we were doing and why weren't we doing this proprietary thing that everyone else was doing. And I would tell that story and I would explain that in fact, what Watson had done was an evolutionary dead end. And the end of that evolutionary dead end had just arrived. And the end of it was open source and free software, because in an interconnected world, customers had to have the ability to connect their machines to each other without a vendor's oversight. That's why open source had to succeed. It was a good sales pitch at the time. It's still a good sales pitch.
Wow. It's nice that you're intersecting in that moment where you had the knowledge at that moment to convey that sentiment.
But the right to repair movement falls into exactly the same category. And that's why I'm a big fan of everyone who's pushing on the right to repair movement.
Yeah.
So I will add a little bit to that, because I started programming in 1973 at Aetna Life and Casualty. That was the largest commercial user of IBM equipment in the free world. And what happened in those days is that we got one of the first Amdahl computers that was ever created. And Amdahl had worked for IBM, and Amdahl had created a computer that was binary compatible, that was completely hardware compatible with the IBM mainframe. And we just took the IBM software and put it on there, binary compatible, and it worked. So what IBM was doing was creating the software for the Amdahl hardware. Back in those days, there was no copyright or patents that could be applied to software. That all happens during the gaming industry, when game companies came out with the ROMs. If you remember the ROMs, they had the ones and zeros for the.
Interesting, yeah.
So what was happening was competitors of gaming companies would duplicate the board, but it was too hard to duplicate the software that was inside the ROM. So the companies that created that software wanted protection from people just copying it. And that's where they applied software copyright,
DRM type stuff.
Right. And later on, that copyright was extended to source code of people, because originally it was only the binaries, the ones and zeros, that came out of that. But eventually it was applied to source code. So, yeah, Bob, and I agree with you. I think that closed source binary software is actually an anomaly that happened at a point in time, and eventually is going to move to free software.
It's interesting from like a consumer perspective, where you see more of proprietary stuff and you don't really see the frontward facing of the openness of it, because every time I have the conversation, usually the dialogue goes very similarly that you had, Bob, with Stallman about. And actually, this is one of the questions: how did you reconcile people saying free software is not a good business model? And I would be interested to hear you dig in a little bit more on that for both of you.
Okay, it's actually a very quick answer that people overlook all the time. And again, another good IBM story. And Lou Gerstner, if you remember IBM, no, you don't. You're much too young. In the 1980s.
My dad worked for DEC. And
well,
then he
so,
took a severance package right before they switched to digital, or switched to Intel, because he thought that digital was going under. And he said it was like the worst mistake of his life. And he said it all the way up until, the day he passed, because it was just.
Yeah. So your dad will know this story then. So in the 1980s, IBM was on its last legs. The board reached outside and brought in a guy called Lou Gerstner. Lou Gerstner was a customer guy, and he did all the right things. He sat down with IBM's major customers. He was the one, when Mad Dog talks about IBM selling solutions, it was Gerstner who understood that IBM's customers were loyal to IBM because of IBM's services, not because of their products.
Got it.
So we were reading about this early on in the Red Hat thing, because we were making a little bit of money selling Red Hat CDs, but we were sort of wondering, how big could this business get? And what was our business model going to be once the internet connections were fast enough that you didn't need to buy Linux on a CD, you could just download it. Our business in the early 90s was thanks to 14.4 modems, because you couldn't download a gigabyte worth of software on a 14.4 modem, so people would pay us for CDs. But we could see the end of that. So what was our business? And we read Making an Elephant Dance, Gerstner's book, where he articulated this, that it's not about the hardware or the product, it's about the services. So we looked, okay, we're going to sell operating systems. We're going to sell as many of them as Microsoft does, because we give ours away for free, whereas Microsoft charges a lot of money. So we're not going to make Microsoft's $44 billion worth of license sales, but we might make some share of Microsoft's $5 billion worth of services around their. We go, a $5 billion market is big enough for us. So we're happy to give the software away in order to build a customer base and a following, so that we could sell services around the software we gave away for free. And that's exactly Red Hat's business model to this very day. It took much smarter people than me. It took guys like Matthew Zulik and the subsequent Red Hat teams to actually execute that vision. I'm not smart enough to do that, but that was in fact the model we adopted back in '95, and it
holds up. It definitely holds up, because I know Red Hat employees that to this day say that you guys support even the most obsolete versions of the software on, even if one person has that version, you guys will support it with the Red Hat service. So
I know as well as they can. They're doing as much as they can there, but like everyone else, at some point you have to call it quits. Yeah.
But I have to point this out, because that was one part of Bob's contribution to it. But I think there was another part that was very important, and that was Bob's realization that Linux was like ketchup, and he wanted Red Hat to be Heinz.
That's right. That's right. So if I could tell the story. So people would keep asking me, and I had to get away from binaries and source code and GPL licenses, because these people were not technical people. And if I said any of those words, they would go to sleep on me. And I didn't want them to go to sleep on me. So I did things like, well, we're sort of like the legal system. If a lawyer makes his case in front of the Supreme Court using a completely unique new argument, every other lawyer is allowed to use that argument without so much as asking permission. That's how our legal system works. And there's lots of big law firms making lots of money. My joke was, not enough people are suing us, so we didn't really want to follow the law firms. So then I would pull out the ketchup one. And here's the ketchup story, which is, how did Heinz get 60% of the ketchup business? And the Americans will tell you it's because Heinz tastes better. But actually, they did a study. They took Heinz and Hunt's and Del Monte to the primitive tribes somewhere, and they discovered two things. They discovered that humans don't actually like ketchup. And the other thing they discovered is they dislike all ketchups equally. So then it goes, how did Heinz get 60% of the market? And how do Americans believe that Heinz tastes better? And the answer is that Heinz has built over the last, whatever it is, 60, 70, 100 years, a reputation for quality and consistency of their recipe. And over time, they have built this position based on quality and consistency to the point where Americans, when they taste ketchup, if it does not taste like Heinz, it is not good ketchup. And yet, ketchup, you can make it in your kitchen sink without so much as bending a copyright rule. It's just tomatoes and vinegar and spices. So how does Heinz get 60% and maintain 60% of the market on what is basically a free software-like commodity of, in Red Hat's case, we have the X window system and SendMail and GNOME, and we just pull it together, and anyone could do that. So how did Red Hat get its market share? And it was exactly the same way.
The secret sauce.
Well, I shouldn't say exactly, as close to the Heights model as we could get.
Your marketing was pretty good, but I'd say there's a little more value than just the marketing in Red Hat's case.
But
It's true for Heights as well. They have big labs. They do a lot of research into how to get people to like their ketchup even more.
But take a look at Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was the soda, right? And they made a big stumble when they brought out new Coke.
Yep.
It was a very big stumble. It gave away huge amounts of market share to Pepsi because it violated the "it always tastes the same." Ironically, if you look very closely at Coca-Cola, they changed the recipe very slowly over time, so slowly that people don't realize it's changing.
That's smart. You can eat a hamburger in McDonald's anywhere in the world and it tastes very similar, if not the same. Standardization.
I'd really love to have these conversations all night, but I do want to be respectful of people's time, and I think now is probably a good time to wrap up and do our closing ceremony. So great to have you back, Mad Dog.
My wife Nancy is calling me for dinner, so thank you for your timing.
Thanks so much for accepting our.
This has been a great pleasure.
It was great.
Thank you.
Have to reach out to Lulu when I'm going to publish my book.
Lulu.com, just Lulu.
Yeah.
I've already published a
Nice.
book. It's great. It's very easy.
Okay, nice to
Oh,
chat
very
with you,
cool.
Love your values and stories.
Okay.
Thank you
Yeah,
both.
bye-bye.
Mad Dog.